Good morning, everyone. I'm Vanessa Caron from the Puerto Rico Energy Bureau of the Public Service Regulatory Board. We begin the technical conference meeting in case number NEPR-AP-2020-0001, request for proposals for a temporary emergency generation at 10:08 a.m. on April 30th, 2020. Before we continue, we would like to state a few instructions. This meeting is being recorded, and the recording will be made part of the administrative file in the instant case. All phones should be muted to limit background noises during the call. Please state your name for the record when speaking. While on the meeting, please avoid placing this call on hold to prevent any background music disrupting the line of thought. Confidential information will not be discussed during the meeting. For today's meeting, participation of interested parties and the general public will be limited to listening mode only. Today's meeting will be held in the English language. However, the Energy Bureau has translation available for anyone who wishes to express themselves in the Spanish language. We want to emphasize that this is a process started by the Energy Bureau in order to ensure that the Puerto Rico Electric Power Authority has the capacity to meet the predicted demand, especially in the peak season. Hi, does everyone hear me now?
Yes, Engineer Caron, this is Attorney Bolaños. The line got a little bit disrupted, and the last thing that I was able to hear was that anybody that wanted to could express themselves in the Spanish language.
All right. So, as I was saying, today's meeting will be held in the English language. But however, the Energy Bureau has translation available for anyone who wishes to express themselves in the Spanish language. We want to emphasize this is a process started by the Energy Bureau in order to ensure that the Puerto Rico Electric Power Authority has the capacity to meet the projected demand, especially in the peak season. As part of this process, two possibilities are being studied: the repair of Costa Food and the use of temporary emergency generation. The former are not necessarily exclusive. It may also be the case that neither is necessary. So during this process, the line of questioning will be conducted by Mr. Bob Fagan, who is a consultant for the Energy Bureau. Also, the commissioners from the Energy Bureau will be participating and asking questions to PREPA. So for purposes of the record, who is present from the Energy Bureau?
Edison Avilés, Chairman.
Commissioner Ángel Rivera de la Cruz.
Commissioner Lilian Mateo Santos.
Commissioner Ferdinand Ramos.
Silvio Duarte.
Who is present from the Energy Bureau consultants?
This is Bob Fagan from Synapse Energy Economics.
And Asa Hopkins, also from Synapse Energy Economics.
And Max Chang from Synapse Energy Economics.
And lastly, who is present from PREPA?
Yes, good morning. This is Attorney Katiuska Bolaños. I'm appearing here today on behalf of the Puerto Rico Electric Power Authority. The declarant for today's process is first Engineer Daniel Hernandez. He's the Director of Generation. Engineer Efrain Paredes, Director of Planning and Environmental Protection. Engineer Gary Soto, Electric Systems Operation Division Head. Mr. Arturo Delis, the Director of the Disaster Funds Management Office, Mr. Fernando Padilla, Administrator of the Office of Restructuring Fiscal Affairs, Engineer Carlos Negron, Administrator in the Generation Directorate, and also present today is Attorney Astrid Rodriguez, General Counsel, Chairman of PREPA's Governing Board, Ralph Trail, but the latter doesn't seek to be here today.
Sí, buenos días, la Figueroa Jaramillo. Necesito si se puede establecer la traducción simultánea.
Katiuska, I'm sorry to interrupt. Katiuska, this is Sam Rodriguez. I'm also here.
I'm sorry, Mr. Sammy Rodriguez, Director of the Risk Management Office.
Thank you very much. Anyone else from PREPA, or that is all, Ms. Bolaños?
That is all.
All right. Well, thank you very much. So, Mr. Chairman, if you want to start with any comments.
Luis Sánchez.
No, Vanessa, just start the minute as we usually do. You already established the rules, and then I think that Bob Fagan is going to initiate his line of questioning to PREPA.
All right. Well, thank you. So, Mr. Fagan, you can go ahead and start your line of questioning.
Okay. Thank you, Vanessa. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to follow the order of questions that we had provided to PREPA in advance. The first question had to do with the cost of the cost to serve repair. And the question indicated that Mr. Ortiz, in a recent media article, said that the cost was about $12 million, although the value differs from the $35 million estimate in the March 31st progress status report. If you could just explain the difference between the two values. And I'll note that I have just seen the April 29th status report that indicates the estimated cost of repair is on the order of $25 million for Costa Sur 5.
Sí, buenos días. Fernando Padilla para Record, PMO de la Autoridad de Energía Eléctrica. En efecto, al momento del informe de progreso de la reparación de la unidad 5 de Costa Sur en el mes de abril, se había hecho una proyección justo por debajo de los 40 millones. Siendo específico en la... Sí.
Permiso, señor Padilla. Dado que la reunión se está dando en el idioma inglés, cuando usted esté hablando en el idioma español, necesitamos que lo haga de forma pausada para entonces que el traductor pueda traducir lo que usted está diciendo al idioma inglés.
Entendido, licenciado.
This is the interpreter. Just for the record, it has just been stated that any comments made in Spanish will be interpreted. However, we request of Spanish speakers that when you do so, please divide your expressions into brief phrases or sentences in order to guarantee quality of service. Thank you. ¿Puede proseguir, caballero?
Muchas gracias. Fernando Padilla para Record, PMO de la Autoridad de Energía Eléctrica. PMO de la Autoridad de Energía Eléctrica. Sí. El informe de progreso del mes de abril estaba proyectando un presupuesto de aproximadamente justo por debajo de los 40 millones. Durante el último mes se han hecho según hemos ido avanzando en la ejecución de los proyectos, se han hecho unas revisiones en cuanto a los estimados y las estrategias de las distintas facetas y las distintas tareas. Contestando específico. Sí, adelante.
In the past month, a projected budget of approximately just below $40 million was estimated. In the latest month, some revisions have been made. Por favor, utilice frases un poco más cortas. Gracias.
En esa línea, los comentarios específicamente del ingeniero Ortiz en los medios de comunicación públicos, básicamente se deben en el contexto donde hubo una declaración de emergencia, se utilizó un proceso de emergencia para solicitar los procesos competitivos de lo que vienen siendo las tareas críticas y tareas esenciales para poder entrar la línea lo más rápido posible.
Well, in the context of what Mr. Engineer Ortiz had expressed, an emergency process was set into effect in order to find competitive and essential duties in an emergency situation.
De ahí la diferencia entre los 12, la cantidad dicha por el ingeniero Ortiz versus la que estamos proyectando.
Therein lies the difference in the amount expressed by Engineer Ortiz and what we are now projecting.
Que en estos momentos tenemos según trabajamos los presupuestos, no lo podemos considerar como un presupuesto baseline aún, pero sí entendemos está aproximadamente en los 25 millones.
So at this time, as we work with the budget, we cannot yet consider it a baseline, but we do estimate approximately 25 million.
Es la vista para la reparación de costas que las tenían.
Okay, this is Mr. Fagan again. So just to confirm, and this is reflected in slide 3 of the April 29th progress report, the estimated cost to repair Costa Sur Unit 5 is on the order of $25 million. Yes?
Eso es correcto. Yes. Sí.
That is correct.
Thank you. My second question in this regard is how much of these costs will be covered by FEMA or by insurance? In your written response to this question, you gave an example that basically indicated how much would come from FEMA and how much would come from insurance. And if I'm interpreting that correctly, what you basically say at the end of the question is that FEMA covers a portion, insurance covers a portion, and based on the response that you gave, it appears that on the order of 82% of the total costs would be covered by the combination of FEMA and insurance. Could you confirm that this is correct? And does this imply that if roughly 82% of the costs are covered by FEMA and insurance, then we could apply that percentage to the $25 million estimate to determine how much in total would be covered by FEMA and insurance?
En estos momentos, según continuamos trabajando el presupuesto y los elementos de costo de todos los trabajos de la reparación de la unidad, aún continuamos trabajando con nuestra organización que maneja los fondos federales y con la organización NEPR-AP que maneja los aspectos relacionados al seguro. Lo que sí podemos indicar con la información que tenemos hoy es que la gran mayoría de los costos y los elementos de costo van a ser cubiertos bien sea por FEMA o por el seguro.
As we continue to work with the budget and our cost elements, we are working with our federal funds management and insurance management. And with our current information at this time, we do understand that most costs and cost elements will be covered by both FEMA and insurance.
Para preguntas específicas sobre los datos, nosotros nos hemos dado a la tarea de hacer estas coordinaciones bien de cerca con las organizaciones internas que representan las relaciones con FEMA y las relaciones con el seguro. Según vamos avanzando los trabajos y vamos ya asegurando cuáles son los presupuestos por cada una de las tareas, podremos tener ya una contestación final o una proyección final y certera de qué elementos y qué costos va a estar siendo cubierto por cada una de las respectivas organizaciones.
As far as the specific question, we have set out to do work in close coordination with the parties that handle our ties with both FEMA and with our insurers. As the work continues and the budget and projections are set for each task, we will soon be able to have a final projection or an estimate of what will specifically be covered with every given task.
In your written response, the example you gave specifically indicated that 82.5% of the total cost would be covered. Is that 82.5% a reasonable fraction, a reasonable estimate of the share that will be covered?
Con la información que tenemos hasta ahora y dejando claro que tenemos que continuar identificando los distintos elementos de costo para asumir para poder completar y poder asegurar un baseline, es una proyección razonable.
With the information that we have so far, and with the caveat that we will need to continue to seek further information as to the identifying of specific costs, it so far does seem like a reasonable estimate.
Chairman Avilés, Padilla, is 82% reasonable or is the best scenario?
Señor Avilés, ¿puede repetir la pregunta?
Could you repeat the question, Mr. Avilés?
Yes, is 82.5% reasonable or the best scenario?
Razonable.
Reasonable.
This is Mr. Fagan again. On slide 13 of the April 29th status report, under the heading FEMA Update, it indicates that FEMA sent official notification to PREPA stating that FEMA considers the temporary emergency generation project eligible for federal funding. Could you provide any documentation from FEMA, such as that official notification, for the administrative record?
Sí, se le puede proveer los documentos y las cartas y comunicaciones recibidas por FEMA que han sido recibidas por la Autoridad de Energía Eléctrica para este tema.
Yes, we can provide documents and letters and communications received from FEMA for the Power Authority.
Padilla, Chairman Avilés, can you provide those documents tomorrow Friday?
Quiero hacer entendemos que sí, señor Avilés, consultamos internamente si hubiera que pedir algún tiempo de prórroga por algunos días adicionales, con mucho gusto, pero quiero confirmar bien con el equipo de trabajo que los tengamos ya listos para el viernes, pero con mucho gusto le confirmamos.
Yes, we understand that it will be possible, but we will need to consult our team to see if a few additional days will be needed, but we will confirm whether it will be possible to get it by Friday.
One further point. What I mentioned on slide 13 had to do with the temporary emergency generation project. Can you also provide information specifically pertaining to the policy to cover the cost to serve repair costs in addition to the temporary emergency generation costs?
Consultaremos con nuestro equipo, que básicamente son los que están relacionando, son los que están ejecutando los trabajos asociados a los reembolsos de FEMA y del seguro, y con mucho gusto.
Yeah, we will consult the team. They are the ones basically associated with executing the reimbursement strategies with our insurers. We certainly will confirm.
Thank you. I'm going to move on. Can you explain if the cost to repair Unit 5 basically allow it to remain in service for an additional few years?
Sí, con las reparaciones que estamos llevando a cabo y la ejecución de los trabajos que se están llevando para la unidad 5 de Costa Sur, básicamente son para ponerlas en las condiciones que estaban justo antes del evento natural de enero. Así que la contestación es que sí, básicamente vamos a poner la unidad en condiciones para estar en servicio.
Yes, with the current work and repairs that are being done in Costa Sur Unit 5, our goal is to have it in conditions that will bring it to the state that it was in prior to the natural event or disaster that occurred in January, so in condition for the 2 years.
Thank you. Are the repairs being done recognizing that the plan may be to retire Costa Sur Unit 5 sometime within the next, for example, 5 years? In other words, are you making sure that you're not spending too much money to return it to service, since it may be retired in the near term, the next 5 years?
No, los costos y los presupuestos que se están distribuyendo, que se están asignando para la reparación de la unidad son con el fin de poner la unidad en servicio, asegurando seguridad sobre todas las cosas y confiabilidad de la unidad cuando entre en línea.
The costs and budget being allocated for the repair of the unit are in order to ensure that service, mostly with safety and reliability in mind.
We asked a question if PREPA staff costs were part of the estimated cost to repair. You said staff costs were part of that, and you estimated that of the total cost of the PREPA staff was between 10 and 15% of the total cost. Is that still the case with this updated cost estimate of roughly $25 million?
Sí, el estimado a base de las proyecciones que estamos haciendo es el que quedó, el que se envió. Sin embargo, continuamos identificando áreas de oportunidad para maximizar el presupuesto, para lograr eficiencia y para asegurar que los trabajos se completen a base de la proyección de tiempo que refleja nuestro itinerario de trabajo.
Yes, the projection is based on the information that has been sent. However, we do continue to find areas of opportunity in order to maximize budget, to ensure efficiency, and to secure the completion of the work in the manner that it has been planned.
Y si eso va a requerir continuar mirando los itinerarios de trabajo y las distribuciones de presupuesto en el personal de energía eléctrica versus los contratos privados, eso es un tema que la gerencia de proyectos continúa evaluando y estará haciendo sus recomendaciones. Pero por el momento, por la información que tenemos, los estimados que le enviamos son los que entendemos van a ser requeridos del personal de PREPA.
As far as requiring further budget or reviewing the timing as between the PREPA employees as opposed to private contractors, management will continue to evaluate, and if they believe adjustments may be necessary in the future, they will provide proposals accordingly, but for now we are foreseeing mostly work done by PREPA itself.
Jaime Montoya.
Thank you. I'm going to move to the second question concerning timing. You indicated that the baseline schedule places the unit back in operation by early August. Can you confirm that and provide any other information on how certain you are of that estimate?
I can confirm the date. Estoy confirmando que según el itinerario, la unidad regresa en servicio en agosto, a base de los itinerarios de trabajo y la ruta crítica para la ejecución de los retornos de la unidad en servicio.
Yes, I can confirm the date according to the schedule that it will be on August based on the time schedule and the critical route for execution of returning to service.
If the COVID-19 pandemic continues into June or into July with restrictions on movement, is that likely to change the return date, or is it likely to not change the return date?
Es un riesgo que se está contemplando según estamos evaluando la proyección de los trabajos y la coordinación de los mismos. Sí estamos en consideración y puede ser un riesgo de potencial atraso, al que causa atrasos en la fecha.
It is a risk that is being contemplated as we evaluate the work and the coordination, but we do believe it to be a potential factor that might cause delay.
Estamos en los procesos de poder mitigar este o cualquier otro riesgo. Sin embargo, sí lo estamos identificando como uno de los potenciales riesgos que puede causar atrasos en la fecha, pero sin embargo sí le estamos mitigando y logrando estrategias para poder disminuir el riesgo lo más posible.
Yes, so we do see that potential, but we are in the process to mitigate this and other risks that might arise, but it is a potentiality. We are, though, currently mitigating efforts in order to strategize accordingly.
The next question concerns the chance of another earthquake occurring. You indicated that the U.S. Geological Survey indicated that there could be an annual chance of 25% of another 6 magnitude earthquake over the next few years in southwest Puerto Rico. That sounds like a high number. Did PREPA talk about whether or not they thought it was worth it to do this, given that remains a high risk? And secondly, if this occurs again after FEMA has already repaired it, would it be anticipated that FEMA would repair it again, if necessary?
Sobre la primera parte de la pregunta, con respecto al riesgo de perder nuevamente la unidad en la causa de un terremoto, como habíamos explicado anteriormente, las reparaciones que se están llevando a Costa Sur básicamente las van a devolver al estado como estaba justo previo al terremoto. Lo que quiere decir es que en una experiencia similar podemos anticipar algunos niveles de daño similares, dadas las mismas condiciones.
Yeah, so in order to answer the first part of the question, in the risk of losing the unit again in a future earthquake, well, as we stated before, repairs are being done in Costa Sur in order to return it to the state in which it was right before the earthquake. That means that we do anticipate that in the event of a similar earthquake, we do anticipate damages that might potentially leave it in the same condition.
Para contestar la segunda parte de la pregunta, el programa de FEMA que se está utilizando para hacer las reparaciones es el programa de asistencia pública, y ese programa lo que lleva es al afectado, que en este caso sería la autoridad de energía eléctrica, específicamente el activo de las unidades de la unidad 5 de Costa Sur, es a devolverla al estado y poder reparar los daños ocasionados por el sismo, para devolverla al estado que estaba justo antes del evento.
As far as to answer the second part of that question, the FEMA program that is being used is the Public Assistance Program, which helps those affected by, in this case, in the case of PREPA, with the assets of Unit 5, is to return it into its pre-existing condition before the damages.
Okay, I'm going to move on to the next question concerning resources and load. I wanted to make sure that there were no other questions at this point from the chairman or the other commissioners on the costs related to Unit 5 before I move on.
This is Commissioner Rivera, not from my part.
Okay, my next question concerns the resource additions that are planned or are already operational for the summer of 2020 prior to CustoSer 5 return to service. There seems to be 3 sources of capacity. The new Megagens resources installed at Palo Seco, new temporary generation that may be obtained per the RFP, and improvements in the availability of the existing capacity. Could you confirm that this is the case or explain otherwise?
Gary Soto, por parte del sistema eléctrico de PREPA. Corrigiendo la pregunta, las unidades de palo seca de los mobile packs están utilizándose diariamente. En cuanto a la generación temporera, eso es uno de los asuntos que PREPA está trabajando ahora, continúa trabajando, y está bajo las consideraciones de los análisis que se están haciendo. Y la tercera, sí, la mejora y los trabajos que se están haciendo para ganar generación que ahora mismo no está disponible y poder utilizarla en los próximos meses.
This is the interpreter. Excuse me. There was a technical glitch. In order to correct the question, Palo Seco is being used daily, and then as far as temporary generation is concerned, one of the matters that temporary generation is one of the matters that PREPA is looking into and continues to have under analysis. And then third, yes, there is an improvement being worked on in order to increase current generation.
Can you also confirm the new Megagens resources in place at Palo Seco?
Las 3 unidades que se están utilizando en Palo Seco, sí, los conocidos como Megagens, son mobile packs, se están utilizando diariamente como parte de la operación de PREPA.
Yes, the 3 units being used in Palo Seco are the ones known as Megagens or mobile packs. They are being used daily by PREPA.
Has PREPA made any efforts to secure interruptibility at large industrial or commercial customers during the summer of 2020 as an additional measure, a demand-side measure to support operations during peak periods, especially under certain emergency conditions? If you have, please provide detail on that. If you have not done that, please explain why not.
luego del terremoto se comenzó a dialogar específicamente con los clientes industriales para establecer la forma en que ellos estaban utilizando su generación. Nos estamos moviendo durante el mes de mayo para efectuar conversaciones y establecer un plan o protocolo para la posible necesidad y uso de su generación durante el periodo de alta demanda.
After the quake, we have been in dialogue specifically with our industrial clients in order to establish how they use their own generations. And also, we're moving into conversations in May for a plan or protocol that could possibly address the use of their own generation during peak times.
In addition to use of their own generation during peak times, have you had any conversations with actual load reductions during critical times at industrial or large commercial customers, demand response options that could be called on under particularly emergency conditions?
Eso va a ser parte de las discusiones que tengamos en el próximo mes.
That'll be part of the discussions that we're going to have in the coming month.
Have you identified specific large customers and specific amounts of potential peak load reduction that you might be able to talk about in the coming months?
Estamos trabajando directamente con un grupo de industriales. Hasta el momento ese es el grupo en que nos estamos enfocando.
We are working directly with a group of industrials. They are currently the group with whom we are focusing on.
But you have not worked directly with any of the largest commercial customers to consider demand response options that could be considered?
En estos momentos no.
At this time, no.
Thank you.
A la orden.
At your service.
I'm sorry, Mr. Fagan. I have one follow-up question regarding this. This is Commissioner Rivera. Mr. Soto, I understand that you are approaching a group of industrial customers. The question is, do you have an estimate on how much peak reduction does these large customers that you are contacting or addressing represent?
En estos momentos no tenemos la información, pero es parte de lo que vamos a trabajar ahora en el mes de mayo.
At this time, we don't have information, but it is part of what we're going to be working on now in the month of May.
Yes. Thank you.
What are PREPA's current projections of minimum generation requirements in megawatts that are required to meet the August 2020 peak loads?
¿Puedes repetir la pregunta?
Could you repeat the question?
Yes. What is your minimum? What minimum generation requirement are you looking for to meet the August 2020 loads? You provided an updated load forecast and generation availability chart. How much generation would you like to have, and why, to meet the August 2020 peak, before and after Costa Sura 5 return to service?
Continuamos trabajando con el análisis de la demanda contra la generación que tenemos disponible continuamente. Siempre considerando que nosotros tenemos establecido dentro de nuestros criterios operacionales ya parámetros de una demanda pronosticada, una reserva en rotación y una reserva fuera de rotación o reserva operacional.
Well, we continue to work with our continuous analysis of demand versus availability at this time. Also, we continuously work with operational parameters of forecasted demands and the need for operational reserves.
In the load generation, in the load forecast versus generation availability updated charts you provided on April 28th, you have indication of base units, peakers, and limited use resources on a weekly basis throughout 2020. Do those graphs contain any additional resources associated with the potential new temporary generation?
Las dos gráficas que se proporcionaron hasta el momento son dos análisis que se hicieron basado en la entrada de Aguirre 2 para mayo y la entrada de Costa Sur 5 para agosto. Esos son, diría yo, nuestros mejores panoramas actuales. Estamos todavía analizando cuáles serían los panoramas de esos dos eventos retrasarse o no poder completarse.
Those two graphs that have been provided are so far our two best analysis done or based on Aguirre 2's entry for May and on Costa Sur for 5 for August. I would say that these are currently our best scenario or panoramas, and we are still analyzing what would happen if there were a delay or incomplete, or if work would not be completed by that time.
Thank you. But these two graphs exclude any new temporary generation?
Sí. En esas gráficas no se incluye generación temporera. Ese análisis se continúa haciendo durante los próximos días.
Yes, neither of those include the temporary generation. This analysis is being done in the next couple of days.
Do you use these graphs or the analysis behind these graphs to estimate how much new temporary generation you may require?
Se pueden utilizar, pero estas gráficas están basadas en la operación del sistema y lo que tenemos actualmente disponible y los programas de conservación de unidades.
It can be done, but this is currently based on our system's current operation and availability, and also on our program for... ¿Podría repetir el final de su oración, por favor?
De mantenimiento de unidades generatrices.
Of maintenance of generation units.
Okay, thank you. This is for 2020. For summer of 2021 and potentially summer of 2022, is the load forecast have you updated the load forecast yet for either of those 2 years? Are you thinking that far out?
Buenos días, este es Efraín Paredes para efectos de récord, director de Planificación y Protección Ambiental. Actualmente nos encontramos en el desarrollo de estas proyecciones para los futuros años. Ahora mismo no podemos contestar la pregunta categóricamente porque estamos trabajando con ese pronóstico para esto que que estamos viendo ahora mismo y otros asuntos que están corriendo en la Autoridad de Energía Eléctrica.
Efraín Paredes from Planning and Environmental Division. Currently, we are doing those projections for the coming years, but we cannot yet provide a categorical answer because we are still working on this forecast based on these and other factors affecting PREPA.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to ask a question concerning Unit 6. You responded that Unit 6 you're not intending to repair at this point in time. Can you confirm that? And is there anything else that you would want to say about the status of Unit 6?
Mr. Fagan, this is Attorney Bolaños. Can you please repeat the question?
Yes. Can you confirm the status of Unit 6 and that there are no plans to repair Unit 6 at the moment? And if there's anything else relevant to Unit 5 repair or your planning concerning Unit 6 at Costa Sur?
Fernando Padilla, PMO de Autoridad de Energía Eléctrica para récord. En estos momentos, el estatus de la unidad 6 es que se encuentra fuera de línea por los daños relacionados al evento del terremoto el pasado enero.
Fernando Padilla, at this time, the status of Unit 6 is that it is out of line because of damages caused by earthquake in January.
Puedo confirmar que la unidad 6 de Costa Sur, la Autoridad de Energía Eléctrica no ha tomado decisión en cuanto a los trabajos de reparación de la misma. Los esfuerzos continúan en asignar todos los recursos y todos los esfuerzos para retornar la unidad 5 con daños menores identificados a retornarse a línea lo más rápido posible.
We can confirm no decisions of repair for Unit 6. Our efforts continue to focus our resources and our work into Unit 5, which has less damages, in order to bring it back in line as quickly as possible.
So is it correct that Unit 6 had actually more damage than what you've seen on Unit 5?
A base de los estudios y a base de las inspecciones que se hicieron, la unidad 6 contiene más daño en comparación que la unidad 5.
Based on studies, research, and inspections made, Unit 6 does have more damages when compared to Unit 5.
Mr. Padilla, this is Commissioner Rivera. I understand that PREPA has not made a decision yet with regards to Unit 6. The question that I have is, are there any current plans, or is PREPA developing any plans at all at this moment to repair Unit 6?
En estos momentos, no. Los esfuerzos completos son para la unidad 5 y la Autoridad de Energía Eléctrica, dígase su principal oficial ejecutivo y su junta de directores, no han tomado decisión. La indicación es que, y el esfuerzo es que nos concentremos a nivel gerencial en la reparación de la 5. Con respecto a la 6, no hay decisión.
There is no decision and there is no plan.
En estos momentos, no.
At this time, no. Our full efforts and resources and energy are going into Unit 5. As far as the authorities, both CEO and board, no decision has been made for Unit 6.
Are you spending any money as part of the repair of Unit 5 to preserve the option to repair Unit 6?
En estos momentos, no. En estos momentos los dólares y las asignaciones de presupuesto, todos se concentran a la reparación directa de la unidad 5. Sin embargo, ha habido dólares que se han presupuestado para mantener la seguridad de la planta con respecto a que tenemos personal, empleados, contratistas que están dentro del site, y para garantizar su seguridad sí se han hecho asignaciones de presupuesto y ejecutados trabajos limitados con el fin de mantener la seguridad del site.
We have there has been a budget allocation, again focusing all repairs directly for Unit 5, but there have been some dollars budgeted to maintaining the safety of employees and contractors on site. So very limited work, but some has been done for site safety.
Señor Padilla, es la comisionada Mateo. ¿En qué fecha la autoridad estima que va a estar en posición de poder analizar la situación de la unidad 6 y hacer el análisis que haya que hacer para determinar el destino de la unidad 6?
Comisionada, a base de las direcciones... Sí.
Un segundo, por favor. Commissioner Mateo, at what date does the authority estimate that it will be in a position to analyze Unit 6 and analyze whatever determination can be made regarding the eventual outcome of Unit 6?
Entendemos, a base de las direcciones que tenemos, que una vez ya estemos cerca o completado la reparación y entrada en servicio de la unidad 5, entonces se estará dictando estrategia, o se estará entonces evaluando la estrategia sobre la unidad 6.
Based on our current direction, once repairs are complete or near completion and Unit 5 is either ready for service or nearly ready for service, then assessments will be done as far as possible strategies for Unit 6. Thank you.
Okay, this is Bob Fagan again. I'm going to ask a few questions concerning availability and capability at existing units and emissions-related issues. Your March 31st status report indicated Ecoelectrica will be available at 527 megawatts maximum capacity. Is it expected that you will have 527 megawatts available throughout the summer and from this point forward at Ecoelectrica?
Mateo.
Gary Soto, operaciones del sistema eléctrico para récord. Hasta el momento, Ecoelectric está operando con una capacidad máxima de 527 megavatios y se espera que continúe operando así durante el resto del año, excepto para septiembre, que tiene coordinado una salida de la unidad 2 por espacio de 10 días.
Gary Soto from operations for the record. So far, the Ecoelectric is running with a maximum capacity of 527 megawatts. It is expected to continue to work accordingly during the rest of the year, with the exception of September, where Unit 2 will be out for 10 days.
Thank you. In your
I'm sorry, Mr. Fagan. Can I follow up on that on Ecoelectrica? Mr. Soto, what is the nature? Is Commissioner Rivera, what is the nature of the outage, the 10 days? Is that planned maintenance, or what type of event will force Unit 2 to be off service in September?
Como es parte del contrato, el año pasado ellos proporcionaron un programa de mantenimiento y la fecha hasta el momento estipulada para el mantenimiento de la unidad 2, según programa, es el mes de septiembre por 10 días.
Okay. How much capacity?
Part of the contract provided last year includes a maintenance program, and accordingly 10 days have been set aside for September in order to provide maintenance.
Apologies about that. In terms of capacity, megawatts, how much does Unit 2 of Ecoelectrica represent?
La unidad 2, estamos hablando de una capacidad por contrato de 167 megavatios. Durante el outage, la salida, estamos hablando que estarían operando en una capacidad alrededor de los 260 megavatios.
So it's roughly half of Ecoelectrica's capacity.
Unit 2 has a capacity of 177 megawatts. So during the outage, we are estimating an operating capacity of 260 megawatts.
Básicamente es la mitad. Hay que considerar no solamente la salida de la unidad, sino también la porción de vapor que se reduce por esa salida.
So that's roughly half. We need to consider not only the output, but also the portion of vapor that will be reduced from that exit.
In the last couple of years, the PREPA's peak has been shifting between August and September. So roughly that's like the critical time where we're expecting to have the system peak load, or system peak load. My question is, I understand that by contract it was scheduled that way. Is it possible to move that further down the road if it is a program maintenance? Is it possible to renegotiate that and have that capacity available during those critical weeks at the end of the summer?
Se ha mantenido el programa con la unidad en septiembre, pero lo que acaba de mencionar es correcto. Se puede, y es necesario, dependiendo de las condiciones del sistema, se renegociaría posiblemente un reschedule de esa unidad, posiblemente para los próximos meses, lo antes posible, para tampoco afectar la operación de la unidad.
The program has been maintained so far for September, but you are correct. It could, if necessary, depending on conditions, be possible to renegotiate or reschedule maintenance of the unit, possibly for the following months. Of course, it should be done as soon as possible, if conditions allow, in order to not affect the operation of the unit.
Esto es algo que tenemos que, obviamente, entraríamos en un diálogo con Ecoeléctrica para poder lograr esto.
This would require entering into dialogue with Ecoelectric in order for it to be done.
Thank you. I don't have any other questions in this area. Thank you, Mr. Fagan.
I have one follow-up. In the generation outage schedule update from April 28th, you actually indicate that the Unit 2 annual outage occurs in the first 2 weeks of October and not in September. Can you confirm if that this has already occurred, that you've shifted it into October?
Para récord, deseo hacer una corrección. Sí, cometí un error en el mes que utilicé. No es septiembre, es octubre.
Just for the record, I would like to make a correction. Yes, I made a mistake. It should not reflect September. It's actually October.
Thank you. I asked a number of questions concerning the reliability or forced outage rates at the older steam units at San Juan and Palo Seco. Can you estimate the reliability of those older steam units throughout the summer of 2020? And is the forced outage rates that were assigned to those units in the IRP, is that still applicable? Is there any reason to think that those units may be more reliable during the summer of 2020?
Daniel Hernández por aquí para récord, director de generación de la Autoridad de Energía Eléctrica. La pregunta va referida a la confiabilidad de las máquinas de Palo Seco. Pregunto.
Abraham García.
Daniel Hernandez, Director of Generation with the Power Authority. Is the question regarding the reliability of Palo Seco, just to clarify?
It's specifically Palo Seco 3 and 4 steam and San Juan 7, 8, and 9 steam.
Bien, Daniel Hernández por aquí para récord. Comenzando con las máquinas de Palo Seco, la unidad número 3 y la unidad número 4 requieren mantenimientos durante este año, que ha llevado a limitar, al no poderlo todavía llevar a cabo, ha llevado a limitar la capacidad que tienen estas unidades.
Daniel Hernandez here again. Starting with the Palo Seco units 3 and 4, they require maintenance this year, and because this maintenance has not yet been done, it has led to a limit on their capacity.
El % de salida forzada en nuestras unidades generatrices ronda entre el 12 y el 14%.
The forced exit percentage on units is between 12 and 14%.
Is that
sí.
12 and 14% forced exit estimate? Is that for all of the units, Palo Seco and San Juan? Are the San Juan 7, 8, and 9 steam units better performing than the Palo Seco steam units?
El estimado del 12 al 14% es un estimado overall para toda la flota nuestra.
The estimate of 12 to 14% is an overall estimate for our entire fleet.
La unidad de San Juan, la unidad 7 de San Juan, es una unidad de uso limitado por la EPA para poder cumplir con las regulaciones federales.
Unit 7 of San Juan is in limited use in order to comply with federal regulations.
La unidad se ha estado utilizando actualmente para una generación de aproximadamente entre 60 y 70 megavatios.
Unit A is being used currently for a generation of approximately between 60 and 70 megawatts.
La unidad 8 es una unidad también de uso limitado por la EPA.
Unit 8 is also a unit of limited use because of the EPA.
Esta unidad tiene problemas en la caldera que producen una limitación de operación máxima de 40 megavatios.
This unit has issues or problems with its boiler, which leads to a limitation in its maximum output of approximately 40 megawatts.
La unidad 9 se ha mantenido estable en operación, produciendo alrededor de 90 megavatios.
Unit 9 has remained stable in its operation, producing an average of 90 megawatts.
One further question. On the generation outage schedule, you indicate scheduled outage for Palo Seco 3 in August, September, and October. Is there anything you can do to ensure its availability during that period, or are you assuming that once Costa Sur 5 is back online, you would then be able to take Palo Seco 3 down for maintenance?
La unidad 3 de Palo Seco tiene vencido su mantenimiento y es la razón principal por la cual ha presentado problemas de confiabilidad.
Unit 3 of Palo Seco is overdue in maintenance, and this is the main reason why it has issues in continuity.
Debido a las limitaciones en generación que nos produjo el terremoto, al tener Costa Sur 5 y 6 fuera, las unidades 2 y 4 de Mayagüez y las unidades de ecoeléctrica, todo el mantenimiento se ha atrasado.
Because of the generation limitations caused by the earthquake of having Costa Sur 5 and 6 out, and also units 2 and 4 of Mayagüez affected, all maintenance has been delayed.
La unidad 3 de Palo Seco la tenemos como prioridad para sacarla a mantenimiento tan pronto tengamos generación suficiente para hacer este trabajo.
Unit 3 of Palo Seco is our top priority in order to provide maintenance as soon as we have sufficient generation which will allow this.
El mantenimiento ambiental que le corresponde a esta unidad tiene una duración aproximada de 6 semanas.
The environmental maintenance provided to this unit has an effect of approximately 6 weeks.
Okay. Thank you for that. 6 weeks. In the generation outage schedule, you actually have 12 consecutive weeks. Are you saying that as long as you have 6 weeks, you can take it out and do maintenance that would help it be more reliable?
Lo que estamos diciendo es que cuando haya generación de reserva suficiente, podríamos hacer un programa para sacar la unidad número 3 de Palo Seco y llevar a cabo el mantenimiento. Pero tenemos que tener generación suficiente para eso.
So when we have sufficient reserves, we could program the work on Unit 3 of Palo Seco, but we will need before that to have sufficient generation.
Okay. Do you need 6 weeks or do you need 12 weeks?
Para el programa de mantenimiento ambiental, por lo menos 6 semanas son necesarias.
For the environmental maintenance program, at least 6 weeks would be needed.
I'm sorry, Mr. Fagan. Mr. Engineer Hernandez, when you say sufficient capacity is required, how do you define sufficient generation capacity?
No lo escucho muy distante, comisionado.
How about now? When you say sufficient capacity is required in order to take the unit out for maintenance, how do you define sufficient capacity in terms of megawatts?
La generación de reserva mínima que nosotros consideramos como suficiente debe considerar generación suficiente para cubrir la demanda y unos 650 megavatios adicionales para cubrir lo que es la generación en rotación y la generación desconectada o apagada.
So, in order to, our sufficient demand is defined as an additional 650 megawatts of generation in order to cover rotation and also generation for disconnected or off devices.
In the case of Palo Seco, you indicated force outage rate of about 12 to 14% for the entire fleet. Do you have specific force outage rates for Palo Seco 3 at this time?
No, en este momento no tengo el dato.
No, at this time I don't have that data.
Ingeniero Hernández, si me permite, comisionado Rivera, usted expresó 650 megas. ¿A qué responde eso?
450 megavatios de generación en rotación o spinning reserve y 200 megavatios offline o generación de respuesta de emergencia pero desconectada.
So to what do those 640 megawatts correspond? Well, 650. Well, 450 of them correspond to backup, and 200 of them correspond to. ¿Podrías repetir la última parte, por favor, de lo que corresponde a los 200 megavatios?
En generación de emergencia apagada.
The last 200 correspond to emergency generation that is off.
Y esos 450, si no me equivoco, es porque esa es la planta más grande que tienes en el sistema.
Eso es correcto.
And those 450, if I'm not mistaken, correspond because this is the largest plant that you have in the system? That is correct.
Okay, pero la realidad es que no estamos trabajando esa planta al 100% de la capacidad actualmente. ¿Cuál es la capacidad que se está trabajando esa planta más grande?
Well, but the reality is that we're not working at 100% capacity right now. What is the current capacity in percentage of the largest plant?
No es por planta, es por unidad. Para hacer la corrección de la premisa, la unidad de mayor capacidad que tenemos disponible es la unidad de Aguirre 1 con 400 megavatios en este momento.
No, it is not per plant, per unit, just to correct the premise of the question. Our current unit with the greatest capacity is Aguirre 1 with 400 megawatts of generation.
Okay, o sea que ya no es 450, es 400.
Okay, so it's already not 450, it's 400.
Lo que sucede es que tenemos una limitación en esa unidad que va a estar corregida ahora en mayo. Son los otros 450 megavatios que están pendientes, así que tan pronto como las próximas semanas, esa unidad volverá otra vez a tener capacidad de 450 megavatios.
Gracias.
Well, the limitation will be corrected soon by the month of May. In the coming weeks, we will have again reached the capacity of 450 megawatts for that unit.
This is Mr. Fagan again. The next question concerns EPA penalties or restrictions that might be imposed on the units that are affected by MATS emissions. Would you expect that there could be penalties over the next year or over the next 2 years if you use those units more than they would otherwise be used?
Efraín Paredes para efectos de récord, director de Planificación y Protección Ambiental. Actualmente la Autoridad de Energía Eléctrica firmó un tolling agreement con EPA. Esto lo que significa es, disculpen, la autoridad lo firmó en marzo pasado. Esto lo que significa es que se van a estar empezando las negociaciones en cuanto al cumplimiento con MATS. Mientras estemos en negociaciones, no hay penalidades que vayan a establecerse. Y que simplemente estamos esperando porque EPA abra negociaciones con nosotros para entonces empezar el diálogo.
This is Paredes for the record. As far as Director of Planification, currently the authority has signed an agreement with the EPA as of March, and what it means is that during these negotiations with MATS, there will be no penalties. So we are still pending on the negotiation with the EPA before this begins.
Could you confirm how long that agreement lasts for, and could you provide a copy of that agreement to the Bureau?
El agreement es simplemente para empezar las negociaciones, es una formalidad para establecer el comienzo de las negociaciones. No tengo idea de cuánto tiempo van a tardar. Sí, se lo puedo someter al negociador.
The agreement is a formality in order to begin the negotiations. I have no idea for how long it is standing, but yes, I can provide it to the Bureau.
Thank you. I just want to return to a question concerning Unit 6 costs. Are the damages at Unit 6 recoverable from FEMA or from insurance, even if it is not to be returned to service?
Mr. Fagan, this is Anthony Bolaños. Can you please repeat the question?
Yes.
Sorry.
Yes. Concerning Unit 6 at Costa Sur, are the damages at Unit 6 recoverable from FEMA or from insurance? Has anything been done to try to recover damages associated with Unit 6, even though it's not returning to service?
Arturo Delis, efecto de récord, los daños a la unidad 6 y a toda la central, a la generatriz de Costa Sur, son elegibles a FEMA y al seguro, porque son daños. Lo que es elegible son los daños.
Arturo de Luz, for the record, the damages of Costa Sur 6 are eligible for FEMA and insurance.
And that money could be paid even if it is not returned to service?
El proceso de FEMA, igual que el del seguro, si hay daños, como una residencia, hay daño en la residencia o un vehículo, en pérdida total del vehículo, el seguro lo paga, aunque no se repare el vehículo. Igual que
the process with FEMA and with insurance, it's as if it would be for a property or a vehicle. If there is damage, like when a vehicle is totaled, the insurance can pay the cost, even if the vehicle is not repaired.
Has PREPA made any application to insurance or FEMA for cost recovery associated with Unit 6 damages?
Se está trabajando con los daños, con el seguro y con FEMA. Se están haciendo las reclamaciones pertinentes en cada uno de ellos.
The claims are being done accordingly with both FEMA and the insurers.
Okay, I'm going to move on to questions concerning alternative capacity sources and the temporary generation RFP. Before I do that, commissioners, are there any other questions you wish to put out on the existing units?
Disculpen por interrumpirle, Fran, para efectos de récord. Si me permite hacer una aclaración del tema de EPA, lo agradezco.
Fran Paredes, for the record, if you would allow me to do just an acceleration, just to clear something up regarding the EPA.
Yes, certainly.
Yo obviamente no sé cuánto tiempo van a tardar las negociaciones, pero el tolling agreement tiene una vigencia de 1 año.
I don't know how long the negotiation will take, but the agreement is standing for a year.
Does this mean your use of the MATS impacted steam units for summer 2021 will be affected? You may have more limitations on those units in 2021 summer?
No pudiera contestar esa pregunta porque no sé cómo van a surgir y cómo van a ser las negociaciones. El hecho de que sea vigente por 1 año no quiere decir que tengamos que terminar en 1 año ni que se pueda extender. realmente no tenemos conocimiento ni idea de cuánto puede tardar ni cuál restricciones nos pueden aplicar todavía.
No, I couldn't really say. I don't know how it will be affected. The fact that the agreement is pending for a year does not mean necessarily that it cannot be extended or come before that. I have no knowledge or idea of what restrictions will come about.
Okay,
this
thank
is
you.
Commissioner Mateo. Mr. Paredes, I would like for PREPA to provide us copies of all of the exchanges between PREPA and EPA regarding compliance with MAT, including the tolling agreement and any waivers for compliance with requirements regarding this emergency. When would you be ready for submitting that?
Podemos tener hasta mediados de la semana que viene.
We could have it by midweek next week.
Okay, thank you.
Concerning some of the proposed new peaking generation, temporary generation.
Just a second, hold on a second. I'm sorry, I had one final question on existing units. Mr. Hernandez, can you tell us what is the status of Aguirre C grant number 2? Something that is being discussed in February.
Yeah. Daniel Hernández para récord. La unidad número 2 de Aguirre presenta problemas en este momento en la turbina.
Yes, this is Daniel Hernández for the record. The Aguirre 2 unit currently presents issues with its turbine.
Presenta altas vibraciones.
It presents high vibrations.
Además de esto, el generador también ha presentado problemas.
Besides this, the generator has also presented issues.
De alta conductividad en el agua demineralizada que se usa para enfriamiento del estator.
There's high conductivity has been found in the demineralized water used for cooling of the unit, of the extractor.
Tenemos dos distintos planes para la unidad.
We have two different plans for the unit.
Resolver, corregir el problema de altas vibraciones que lo estamos llevando a cabo en este momento.
To resolve or correct the issue of the high vibrations, that's being done at this time.
El pronóstico para intentar ponerla en servicio basado en esa reparación sería en la próxima semana.
The forecast to try to put it into service based on those repairs would be in the coming weeks.
Una vez que la unidad esté en servicio, vamos a observar los parámetros para determinar si la unidad está confiable y se puede dejar en servicio.
Once the unit is in service, we will be observing and monitoring its parameters to then determine its reliability and determine whether or not the unit can remain in service.
Si la condición del agua demineralizada de enfriamiento del estator presenta parámetros fuera de lo que sería una operación normal, tendríamos que tomar una alternativa adicional, que es sacar la unidad y hacer un rebobinado del estator.
If the demineralized water parameters read as being outside of what normal operations is, then we would have to consider reworking of the coil of the extractor unit.
Ese trabajo de rebobinado del estator tiene una duración de aproximadamente 60 días a partir y sería posible llevarlo a cabo a partir de mediados de junio, de acuerdo a la disponibilidad del personal de la compañía General Electric.
And that recoiling would have a duration of 60 days. It could possibly be laid out for mid-June, pending availability of General Electric personnel.
Eso quiere decir que la unidad número 2, la proyección de tenerla en servicio y confiable para agosto va a depender de lo que ocurra en las próximas 3 a 4 semanas.
That means that as far as the Unit 2's projection of reliable service for August, it will all depend on what happens within the next 3 to 4 weeks.
Copio, Mr. Hernandez, can you confirm that these problems with the unit are different from the one that actually took the unit out more than a year ago?
Le agradezco mucho que me haya hecho esa pregunta.
I am very grateful for your asking that question.
Me da la oportunidad de expresar lo siguiente. Eso es cierto, la unidad salió de servicio el año pasado por un problema en el transformador principal de salida.
It's true that it allows me to say that the unit left service last year because of an issue with the main exit transformer.
Y antes de salir de salida, la unidad no presentaba ningún tipo de problema de vibración o de alta vibración, ni problemas de alta conductividad en el agua demineralizada del estator.
Before that exit, the unit did not present any issues with vibrations or any issues with conductivity in the demineralized water of the extractor.
Por eso es que este comportamiento o estos problemas son típicos cuando una unidad permanece fuera de servicio por mucho tiempo.
And so this behavior or all these issues are typical of a unit that is left out of service for an extended period of time.
Por eso es que cuando nos tenemos que poner esto.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Esto es parte de lo que tenemos que tomar en consideración cuando vayamos a establecer una fecha posible de retorno en línea de la unidad 5 de Costa Sur, porque la unidad para ese momento va a haber estado fuera de servicio por muchos meses, por lo que va a haber un periodo de transición hasta que la unidad pueda otra vez retomar una operación confiable. Lo mismo nos pasó cuando estuvimos trabajando con la unidad 4 de Palo Seco hace un par de años atrás.
Yeah, I guess,
So part of what needs to be considered then when establishing the dates of unit, this all needs to be taken into account when considering the possible dates of reestablishing the service of Unit 5 Costa Sur. By then, that unit will have been out of service for several months, so it requires a time of transition before we have reliable operation. The same thing happened with Palo Seco Unit 4.
I understand. I can ask, I have a couple of questions regarding that, but finishing the topic on Costa Sur, on Aguirre steam unit number 2, are the vibration problems, does the vibration problems occur at all levels of operations, or there is let's say, a safe level in which the unit can operate and generate?
No, las lecturas de vibración exceden los niveles de vibración recomendados por el fabricante. en este momento.
The level of vibration currently exceeds the recommendations from the manufacturers.
At all levels?
Se corrió la unidad llegó a estar sincronizada, así que durante el periodo en que estuvo sincronizada generando 20 megavatios, se reflejó esas altas lecturas con las que estamos trabajando para corregir.
The unit was synced. When it was synced, it was running at 20 megawatts, and that's when we got those readings that we are now trying to work with.
When you talk about, we have to take this into consideration regarding the date or the expected date for the Costa Sur 5 unit to be in service. Question is, it's being said that, or it's being projected that it will be in operation around August of this year. Does that mean that that's the date where these type of testings are gonna start, or is the timeline include testing before that in operation date or estimated in operation date?
El itinerario de trabajo incluye algunas pruebas, pero no es hasta que la unidad es sincronizada y empieza a ofrecer generación de forma incremental hasta llevarla a sus valores nominales. Hasta que eso no ocurra, no vamos a saber si la unidad está completamente confiable. Y no hay forma de probar que ella va a estar generando confiable 400 megavatios hasta que la unidad no entre en sincronismo, y eso no entre en servicio, y eso no se puede hacer durante parte de las pruebas. En las pruebas se toman unas lecturas con la unidad fuera de servicio hasta que se determine que por lo menos con la unidad no sincronizada los parámetros básicos se cumplen, toda la instrumentación está dentro de lo que serían los valores razonables, que es lo que nos determina a nosotros si la unidad puede entrar o no en servicio.
Well, the work schedule includes testing, but it's not really until all units are synced that then we can offer an incremental generation. Until then, we will not reach nominal values. It means that we won't know until then whether the unit is completely reliable. We have no way of seeing whether the unit will reliably produce the 40 megawatts. This cannot be done only through initial testing. The testing involves readings taken while the unit is not yet in service until we do determine that it is within basic parameters and that these are complied with. Then once we have reasonable values, we can decide whether or not the unit can be put into service.
And as per your work schedule, when is the earliest that you can start doing the syncing? Where's the earliest that you can sync Unit 5?
Según el itinerario, y Fernando Padilla está en línea, que me puede corregir, entiendo que está para el 14 de agosto, pero yo preferiría que sea Fernando Padilla, que es el que está a cargo del itinerario de la reparación, que diga la fecha exacta que tienen en este momento proyectado completar todos los trabajos.
Correcto. Fernando Padilla para récord.
I have, according to our schedule, and Padilla will correct me, but I believe that August 14th. I would prefer, though, that Padilla set an exact date because he is the one that is in charge of scheduling, and he can give us a better projected time.
Bueno, Fernando Padilla para récord, sí. La proyección de trabajos y el itinerario proyecta la entrada en servicio de la unidad el 14 de agosto.
Yes, Fernando Padilla for the record. The projection of entry unit in service is for August 14th.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Fate.
Okay, this question concerns the temporary generation RFP. You indicated that the RFP was for up to 500 megawatts of generation. If you assume Cluster 5 is back in service in August, what's the actual incremental generation you think you will need through the temporary generation RFP?
Hi, Mr. Fagan. This is Vanessa. Maybe you can repeat the question so then we can get an answer from Barbara.
Okay. This concerns the temporary generation RFP. It was for up to 500 megawatts of temporary generation. How much do you actually think you will need for this summer at this point in time?
Gary Soto, operación del sistema eléctrico para récord. Como han escuchado, tenemos varios panoramas y varias incertidumbres a la vez. Considerando el peor, lo que podríamos decir como el escenario más crítico para prepa, estamos hablando entre 350 megavatios a 510 megavatios.
Gary Soto from Operations for the record. We have several panoramas or forecasts and uncertainties. Considering it a worst case scenario for the Power Authority or PREPA, we're considering somewhere between 350 megawatts to 510 megawatts.
And how do you make that computation? Is it based primarily on your operating reserve need of 650 megawatts?
Consideramos el pronóstico de carga que tenemos, en este caso la disponibilidad de unidades y sería el tope sería la reserva total del sistema, que sería 650 megavatios por encima del pronóstico de carga.
So we would consider the low forecast. We would consider our units available, and the top would be the system's total reserve of 650 megawatts above the forecast load, the load forecast.
Under what scenarios would you not need any new temporary generation?
Tendríamos que tener en estos momentos en línea estar operando con Costa Sur 5 y 6, estar operando con Aguirre 1 y 2, o que ellas estén en un mantenimiento y nosotros básicamente estaríamos en una operación normal de nuestro sistema, que no, obviamente no contemplaría la utilización de generación temporera.
We would need to have running online the operation of Costa Azul 5 and 6, to have Aguirre 1 and 2 under proper maintenance, and then we could consider it to be under normal system operations. Under those circumstances, then we would not require temporary generation.
Before we continue, Mr. Fagan, Mr. Soto, you said that the most critical scenario you will require between 350 and 510 megawatts. How can you describe that critical scenario? Well, what is that critical scenario?
Sería considerando que la unidad de Aguirre número 2 y la unidad 5 de Costa Azul no entrarían en servicio por el resto del año, o sus retrasos en entrar pasarían el periodo que estamos contemplando ahora mismo de alta demanda entre junio y octubre de este año.
The critical scenario would be considering that Aguirre 2 and Costa Sur 5 not enter into service, or for there to be a delay in the current forecasts between June and October of this year.
You mentioned that the only scenario that will not require temporary generation will be a scenario where we have Costa Sur 5 and 6 and Aguirre 1 and 2 online or in service. But a question. We've been operating without Aguirre 2 for over a year. And there was no talks or need of temporary generation last year when Costa Sur 5 and 6 were operating. How can you reconcile those two statements or those two things?
Comisionado, recuerde que yo opero el sistema y obviamente voy a buscar la mejor situación para yo operar mi sistema. Por lo tanto, basado en la pregunta que me hacen, yo establezco cuál sería el mejor escenario, que serían todas las unidades base en servicio, y como hemos operado en otros periodos, mantener nuestro programa de mantenimiento y entonces poder hacer hasta lo que hemos hecho hasta los últimos años después de los eventos que hemos tenido, que es hacer un despacho económico. Por eso la contestación incluía todas las unidades.
So, Commissioner, remember that I run operations. I seek the best situation. So, based on the question that was made, I established that the best scenario would be to have all units in service with our maintenance program running properly. Then we would be able to do what we had been doing up until the events that affected us, as they have recently. And then we would be able to do an economic dispatch. That's why I answer the way I did.
You know, I understand what you're saying about the best scenario, but the question was not about the best scenario. The question was about in which scenario or up to where we can say we do not need temporary generation. I understand what you're talking about, economical dispatch, and of course, in a perfect world, we'll have all our system in place so we can economically dispatch all the units. But here we're talking about a shortfall or shortcoming on generation available to meet forecasted load plus what we consider is the safe reserves.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll probably reiterate the question or rephrase the question that Mr. Fagan asked at the beginning. What is that sweet spot, or what is that scenario in which generation or additional generation or additional temporary generation is not required? Taking into consideration, for example, that Aguirre 2 was completely offline for the most part of the last year, including 8 or 9 months before the earthquakes, and the system was operating without temporary generation.
Creo que me voy a mantener en mi contestación y le explico brevemente. El año pasado sí, la mayoría del año estuvimos con Aguirre 2 fuera, pero para la época alta, específicamente septiembre, tuvimos unas situaciones por problemas con unidades. Eso nos causó inclusive entrar en relevos de carga durante unos periodos por falta de generación debido a que Aguirre 2 estuvo fuera y ocurrieron varios eventos en múltiples unidades a la vez. Por lo tanto, podrá entender por qué mantengo mi respuesta.
Yes, I will stand by my answer in this case. Just to explain briefly, last year, yes, for most of the year, Aguirre 2 was out, but especially during the higher low or the peaks of September, we had issues with several of the units. It even caused us to have to do overlap between units for the load. So while Aguirre 2 was out, we had issues with several units.
Soto, Edison Avilés. Ok, actualmente, con Costa Sur 5 y 6 fuera, Aguirre 2 fuera, ¿ustedes tienen la reserva que se ha hecho mención durante la mañana de hoy?
I'd like to ask, currently, with having Aguirre 2 out, do you have the reserves that have been spoken about this morning?
Durante en los momentos de baja carga durante la mañana cumplimos con la reserva. Ya entrado el mediodía y durante la noche no cumplimos con la reserva.
Okay. Actualmente
in the mornings we have complied with the loads, but by the afternoons and evenings we are not in compliance with our reserves.
En conclusión, así es que estamos operando hasta el día de hoy. Estamos claros, ¿verdad? Como me acabas de describir.
Eso es así.
So in conclusion, to date we are operating as you've just said. To date, yes, that is so.
¿Y eso viene sucediendo desde cuándo?
And since when has this been happening?
Desde el evento del terremoto del 7 de enero.
Ever since the earthquake of January 7th.
Hubo unos periodos, si no recuerdo mal, en febrero, que dada a que la demanda estaba más baja y ganamos mayor capacidad de unidades disponibles, sí cumplimos, pero por lo menos un ejemplo como en las últimas semanas con el incremento que ha habido de demanda, sí, no estamos cumpliendo la reserva. A veces podemos cumplir con la reserva en rotación, pero en pocas ocasiones. Por lo tanto, no cumplo reserva en rotación, tampoco estoy cumpliendo la reserva total.
So, with the events since February, demand has been lower, and we have also been able to increase capacity in some of our units. But just to give you an example, in the past few weeks, with an increase in demand, we have not been in compliance with our reserves. Sometimes we can with rotation, but very rarely, and so we're also not really in compliance in total.
Okay, pero no ha recurrido a relevos de carga. No ha recurrido a relevos de carga.
But you have not had to resort to overlaps of
Ramiro Rodríguez.
Exactamente, no hemos recurrido a tener que programar relevos de carga por insuficiencia de generación.
Okay.
Exactly. We have not had to resort to overlaps for the reload of generation.
Okay. Dicho eso, ¿cuánto es el aumento de carga proyectado con relación a lo que tenemos ahora mismo para la demanda pico?
Having said that, what is the projected increase of load in relation to what we have right now for our peak demand?
Ok, ahora mismo nuestra demanda pico está entre los 2.425 y 2.450 megavatios. Para la época pico debemos estar en los 2.850, alrededor de ese número, de 2.850.
Our peak demand right now is between 2,425 to 2,450 megawatts. Our peak later should be of around 2,850, give or take.
Aproximadamente 450 mega adicionales.
Approximately 450 additional megs.
Exactamente.
Exactly.
Okay. Y ahora mismo no tenemos ni Costa Azul ni Aguirre 2.
And right now we have neither Costa Sur nor Aguirre 2.
Correcto.
Correct.
Y la suma de esas dos generaciones, ¿cuánto es?
And how much is the sum of those two generations?
860 megavatios.
860 megawatts.
Tan pronto entren esos dos, vamos a tener para suplir la generación pico, más no vamos a tener problemas de ninguna índole con la reserva.
So as soon as those two come into effect, we are going to be able to not only cover but also have no issues with our reserves.
En el mejor panorama, en la mejor situación, ese sería el mejor panorama. Correcto.
That would be a best case scenario.
Gracias.
Mr. Soto, you said, just to clarify, you just said that in the last couple of weeks, demand has increased?
¿Puede repetir la pregunta, por favor?
Could you please repeat the question?
I just want to clarify a statement or make sure that I understood what you said. Did you just say that in the last several weeks, demand has increased on the system?
Eso es correcto.
That is correct.
Okay. We'll come back to that later on, but my follow-up question with regards to peak demand and how we've been able to meet it, what has been the minimum reserve margin that we have had in the last several weeks?
Puede un término que no entendí.
I didn't understand the question.
You said that in the last several weeks we've been able to meet our load, but we have not been able to meet our reserve margin. Correct?
Eso es correcto.
That is correct.
So, you said that we haven't had any port outages, customers, because we've been able to provide at least load and some margin over that, correct?
¿Puedes repetir?
Could you repeat?
Let me rephrase it this way. The peak loads that we're seeing today are between 2425 and 2450, correct?
Sí, la demanda está integrando en el pico en cerca de los 2.425 a 2.450 megavatios.
In the last
yes, the demand is close to 2425 and 2450 megawatts.
In the last several weeks, what has been the peak generation?
Ha habido una pequeña reducción en cuanto a la demanda por la situación del COVID-19, pero hemos tenido días que hemos llegado a la demanda máxima esperada para este periodo.
That is not the question.
So we have had a small reduction in demand because of COVID-19, but there have been days in this period where we have reached the maximum expected demand.
Okay.
¿Puedes refrasearla?
I'm a little confused about your statement now. A little while ago, you said that demand has been increasing, and now you're saying that demand has been decreasing.
Entendí su pregunta ahora.
Now I understood your question.
Will it be more accurate to say that demand has been decreasing, and there have been isolated incidents in which demand has reached, for a small period of time, the expected demand for the period?
La demanda ha continuado aumentando debido a la curva natural de que se comporta nuestro sistema. La demanda entre enero, febrero y marzo va a tener un continuo aumento.
Demand has continued to increase because of natural system behavior. Demand has gradually been increasing between January, February, and March.
Yo lo comparo con la demanda pronosticada o esperada para este periodo.
I compare it with the forecasted demand for this period.
Mi contestación sobre la situación actual de que ha habido una reducción pequeña por la situación del COVID es comparándola con la demanda pronosticada para este periodo. Pero con toda esta situación hubo días que llegamos a tocar esa demanda pronosticada.
So my answer regarding the current situation is that there has been a small reduction when comparing it with the forecasts. But there have been days where throughout this whole situation we have reached that forecasted demand.
Okay. So normally PREPA generates or is generating at a higher level than the actual load on the system, correct?
Eso es correcto.
That is correct.
So in the last several weeks, the same weeks for which you have estimated that your peak load has been between 2425 and 2450, what has been the top generation or the highest generation, or where is your generation during this time period? What is the level of generation at that time period?
Para estos periodos hemos
For these periods, we've
para el último mes y medio estamos alrededor de 2.700 megavatios promedio de disponibilidad o de capacidad de unidades.
Okay, for the last month or month and a half or so, we've been around 2,700 megawatts available with the unit's capacity.
So is it safe to say that you have around, right now, today, about 250 megawatts of reserves?
Así que sería seguro decir que al día de hoy tiene aproximadamente 250 megavatios de reserva.
Bajo ese parámetro, sí.
Under that parameter, yes.
Thank you.
Gracias.
One follow-up question. This is Mr. Fagan. In the load forecast generation availability chart, updated April 28th, you have two charts. Scenario 1, Aguirre online in May, and Scenario 2, Aguirre online in August. My first question, the data behind these charts are in weekly increments, correct?
Eso es correcto.
That is correct.
Can you provide the data in Excel file format for each of these two charts to the Bureau this week?
Mr. Fagan, maybe you can repeat the question to Mr. Soto so he can answer.
Yes. Can you provide the data behind the two charts, Scenario 1 and Scenario 2, in Excel file format to the Bureau this week? I'm sorry, was the question heard?
Sí, vamos a revisarla y se van a hacer los trámites para proporcionarle la información.
Yeah, we're going to analyze it and arrange to provide the information.
Thank you. And one more on this. Essentially, the load forecast and the required total reserve lines on this graph, those are the critical indicators of what your reserve requirement is above the load, correct?
Eso es correcto.
That is correct.
I'm going to shift questions. The locations indicated for some of the new temporary generation, what is PREPA doing to make sure that any new temporary generation doesn't prevent longer-term battery energy storage or solar PV from being able to connect at those locations?
Mr. Fagan, this is Attorney Bolaños. Can you please repeat the question, please?
Yes. In the temporary RFP, there's an appendix that indicates the sites for possible location of temporary generation, 9 sites. What is PREPA doing to ensure generation connections there would only be temporary if future long-term battery or solar generation were to want to connect at those locations?
Yo puedo contestar esa pregunta. Daniel Hernández por aquí.
Daniel Hernandez here. I could answer that question.
Todas las localidades indicadas son puntos existentes de conexión para nuestros generadores.
All locations indicated are existing connection points for our generators.
Se seleccionó puntos de conexión donde tenemos problemas con nuestros generadores que nos han obligado a tenerlos fuera de servicio.
Points of connections of our generators that have been having issues are ones that have been chosen to disconnect them from service.
La intención de usar estos puntos de conexión es permitir que se pueda conectar de forma rápida, justamente antes del pico de verano, generación temporera.
The intention with this is to be able to do a quick connection with temporary generation in the peak times.
No es nuestra intención dejar esa generación temporera conectada permanentemente.
It is not our intention to have that temporary generation permanently connected.
Okay, so it would not preclude a battery or solar PV connecting at those locations in the future.
Así que no, excuse me.
Las conexiones son existentes. Las conexiones de esas localidades son para nuestros equipos existentes.
The connections of those locations are for our existing equipment.
My question relates to the near future. The resources evaluated in the IRP in many scenarios included extensive battery resources to be connected where they can be connected. My question is, will those locations still be available in the near term, the next 2 to 3 years, for battery connection?
Sí, Efraín Paredes, para efectos de récord. Sí, la autoridad está mirando, ¿verdad?, el resultado del RFP para algo temporero, algo de pocos meses. Una vez pasemos esta crisis, los lugares van a estar disponibles si fuera necesario para poner este tipo de tecnología.
Frank Perez, for the record, the authority is looking into the temporary effect of these. Once this crisis has passed, the locations will be available for this sort of adjustment.
The temporary generation RFP talks about June 1st. If there are resources, battery resources, that could connect at those locations, but not until next year, would you make sure that there is room for 2021, for example, interconnection of batteries at some of those locations?
Disculpe, ¿puede repetir la pregunta?
Could you repeat the question?
Yes, I'm sorry. The question is, how much room exists for interconnecting batteries during 2021, not during 2020, at those locations?
La contestación a esa pregunta no es tan directa, porque los lugares que se están proponiendo de instalación de baterías a gran escala en el IRP no son necesariamente los lugares de generación.
The answer to that question is not quite direct because the proposed locations for these are not necessarily the generation locations.
Entonces, una vez acabemos con el controlar esta emergencia o esta crisis que tenemos ahora en términos de generación, pues lo mismo lugar que tenemos disponible para generación temporera estuviera disponible para colocar baterías si fuera necesario.
And so once we finish controlling this generation crisis, the temporary locations can become available for batteries if it becomes necessary.
Okay, thank you. And any interconnection room that still remains can certainly still be used for battery connection?
El ingeniero Hernández mencionó ahorita que los lugares que se colocaron, ¿verdad?, en el RFP son lugares existentes de generación nuestra que pues no vislumbramos que estén en línea en un corto periodo de tiempo, pero eso no quiere decir que no la vamos a tener disponible en un mediano plazo.
The engineer Hernandez mentioned the fact that the RFP, our locations, we're not foreseeing them being in line for the short term, but that doesn't mean that they cannot become available for the midterm.
Okay, thank you. Can you just confirm that batteries would be eligible for FEMA or other federal funding as part of replacement resource options, even if they don't meet a June 1st, 2020 deadline?
Lo que es elegible, Arturo Delis, para efectos de récord, lo que es elegible para FEMA es reemplazar la generación como estaba antes del terremoto, no es, la generación base que estaba antes del terremoto. Eso es lo que es elegible para FEMA.
What is eligible for FEMA is to replace generation to the base that it was at before earthquakes. That's what's eligible for FEMA.
Okay, so my question is about timing. If the temporary generation RFP, for example, resulted in some amount of generation, could you then continue to install additional battery generation up to the total capacity of cost to serve, for example, at later points in time and still receive FEMA funding?
Si las baterías operan 24 horas al día, como lo hace la generación que teníamos en Costa Sur, elegible. Yo no sé mucho de ingeniería, pero creo que las baterías no funcionan 24 horas al día. No serían elegibles en este momento.
If the batteries were to operate at 24 hours, like the Costa Sur plant had been running, then they would be eligible. I don't know much of engineering, but I don't believe that batteries can run for 24 hours, so I don't think that they would be eligible.
That begs a more fundamental question. Batteries are completely dispatchable, but they're not a generation resource, but they are a capacity resource during peak period. Are they eligible, or would they be eligible for FEMA funding to fulfill capacity during peak periods, dispatchable capacity?
Lo que estamos solicitando a FEMA es la generación que había. Los daños que sufrió Costa Sur generaba, era una generación base, y eso es lo que se está reemplazando, que trabajaba 24 horas al día. Para FEMA es elegible ponerle las condiciones, o tratar de ponerle las condiciones en que estaba antes del terremoto. Y esto es un trabajo de emergencia de FEMA, en categoría de emergencia de FEMA.
Well, as far as the damages for Costa Sur, what is eligible is to have it back to its base generation. That's what's being replaced. So for FEMA, it's only eligible to have it as it was right before the earthquake under emergency repairs.
Sammy Rodríguez para Record. Para efectos del seguro, el reemplazo de la generación de Costa Sur en caso que Costa Sur no sea reparable, está cubierto por la póliza de seguro de propiedad de PREPA hasta el punto de que sea equivalente el costo de reemplazo de la reparación de Costa Sur utilizando otras formas de generación. Ello incluye la energía renovable.
Sammy Rodriguez for the record. As far as insurance and the replacement of generation, if Costa Sur were not to be repairable, then it would be covered under property insurance for PREPA up until the equivalent of the cost of the replacement using other forms of generation, which includes renewable energies.
So does that mean that a combination of solar PV and batteries could be recoverable under FEMA funding if that's being used to replace essentially a portion of Costa Sur capability?
Si la combinación de ambos tiene el mismo efecto de la generación que tenía Costa Sur antes del terremoto, sí es elegible.
If the combination of both were to be the equivalent of what Costa Sur had before the earthquake, yes, it would be eligible.
But does it have to be equivalent to Costa Sur? Couldn't it be just a portion of the Costa Sur output, and then a portion is served by other resources, such as temporary fossil?
Es que estamos en FEMA, hay dos tipos de categoría de emergencia y categoría permanente. En categoría de emergencia es algo que puede hacer la autoridad rápido para poder suplir esa generación que perdimos a causa del terremoto. Y lo que sea rápido, que se pueda instalar rápido, que supla la necesidad causada por la pérdida de generación en Costa Sur es elegible.
So as far as FEMA, they have what can be considered as temporary and permanent. In an emergency, for example, the supply generation loss because of the earthquake can be covered, and whatever can be quickly supplied in order to cover the needs from Costa Sur is also eligible.
Y Costa Sur es generación base, es lo que se trata de lo que es elegible para FEMA.
And Costa Sur is base generation, which is what is eligible for FEMA.
We asked a question, number 12, in the list concerning what PREPA has done in regards to preparing for battery procurements in general. And there was a response concerning new utility-scale battery resources. Could you answer that question? The response has to do with battery resources associated with the P3 process.
Sí, Efraín Paredes para efectos de récord. La autoridad actualmente no se encuentra bajo ningún proceso competitivo para este tipo de tecnología porque estamos en espera de la decisión final del negociado en cuanto al IRP.
Efrain Paredes for the record. Currently, the authority is not under any competitive process for these technologies because they are awaiting a final decision from the Bureau regarding RFP.
Una vez tengamos la decisión final del negociado en cuanto al IRP, comenzaremos las coordinaciones con ellos para los procurement necesarios para todos los assets de generación que serían aprobados.
So once the Bureau has reaches a final decision, we will begin to coordinate for necessary procurement for any approved generation.
Y en cuanto al proceso competitivo que corrió las alianzas público-privadas, hasta donde tengo entendido está detenido por hechos de fondo.
As far as the process of competitiveness from public-private entities, I understand that the process is held up because of want of funds.
Can PREPA identify what the best locations for new utility-scale battery resources might be, and whether or not it coincides with the locations put out for the temporary generation?
Sí, este tipo de tecnología usualmente se debe conectar donde tengamos la mayor accesibilidad a la red, o sea, puntos de interconexión fuertes.
Yes, this type of technology should generally be connected where it is most accessible to the network. In other words, strong connectivity points.
Estos puntos de conexión a la misma vez deben estar cerca de los centros de carga.
These connection points, in turn, should be close to load points.
Dado eso, los puntos preferidos o puntos que se han identificado son los centros de transmisión donde no se está contemplando poner generación temporal.
Because of this, then, the preferred points identified are transmission centers where we are not foreseeing temporary generation.
Those would be preferred points, but would the temporary generation locations also be candidates for some battery installation?
¿Puedes repetir la pregunta?
Could you repeat the question?
Yes. Your preferred points are transmission centers close to load. The 9 generation station locations indicated in the RFP could also be used as a battery resource connection point?
El ingeniero Hernández hace unas cuantas preguntas atrás indicó que los lugares que se colocaron en el RFP son lugares que pueden estar disponibles porque no tenemos generación ahí, pero no podemos prever que pueda estar restablecida pronto.
The engineer Hernandez mentioned earlier that the locations identified for our RFP can be made available because they are not foreseen as having temporary generation, but we cannot foresee. ¿Podría repetir la última parte de su respuesta, por favor?
Sí, que cuando una vez cuando una vez terminemos con la generación temporera, las máquinas nuestras van a estar colocadas en esos sites.
Once we finish with the temporary work, our machines will be set in those locations.
Okay, I'm going to move on to one more question concerning the economics of dispatch. Before I do that, commissioners, I don't know if there's additional battery-related questions you may have?
Not from me at this time.
Neither from me.
Okay, the question I have has to do with after Cluster 5 would be back in service, if it remains less expensive to dispatch with oil-fired units, would you do that? Would you continue to dispatch on economics? Just because Cluster 5 is in service, would you definitely use it for energy? Or might you dispatch oil ahead of it if the oil is cheaper?
Gary Soto, para récord, dentro estamos conscientes de ese escenario y estamos analizando conjunto a la oficina de combustibles y los aspectos legales del contrato que tenemos con Costa Sur para poder tomar esa determinación.
Gary Soto, for the record, we are aware of that scenario and are analyzing along with the fuel office regarding the legal aspects of the Costa Sur contract in order to determine that.
Could you provide an update to the Bureau when you have a better sense of how you would consider dispatch under low oil price scenarios?
Podemos proporcionarlo.
We can provide it.
Thank you. I have no more questions. I'll note that PREPA will provide the data behind the generation and load graphs from the April 28th attachment. PREPA has already provided the hourly generation reports that we asked of them. And my last question would be if you could provide information on which units PREPA uses on a regular basis for both spinning and non-spinning reserve.
Gary Soto nuevamente para récord, estamos trabajando con la información para poder proporcionarla lo antes posible.
Gary Soto, for the record, we are working with the information in order to be able to provide it as soon as possible.
Okay, thank you. I have no further questions, Vanessa.
I do have several questions, Vanessa, before we can continue. I'm going to be referencing the generation outage schedule, the two scenarios that PREPA provided. The questions, whoever has the answer to the questions, I will appreciate it if they provide it. Like Mr. Fagan established, or PREPA established before, we have two scenarios. One where Aguirre is online by mid-May and one that it isn't. I just want to confirm, want to make sure that I understand all the information that this graph provides. The line in black represents the load forecast, essentially what PREPA will be required to provide. Can PREPA confirm that?
Gary Soto, para el récord, sí, la línea negra es el pronóstico de carga de este año.
Okay. And the blue line represents what?
Gary Soto, for the record, excuse me, sorry. Gary Soto, the black line does represent the low forecast for this year.
The blue line represents the required total reserve, meaning that forecast plus 650, correct?
Eso es correcto.
That is correct.
Okay. And the graphs that we see where the color scheme that we say is base units, limited use, and peakers, these are stacked available generation, correct?
está basada en el pronóstico de las unidades que entendemos y que se ha discutido hasta el momento que deberían estar disponibles para ese periodo con sus limitaciones.
It's based on the unit's forecasts according to the discussion that we've had of the expected availability and the current conditions of the units.
Okay. PREPA determines what they call a critical deficiency between its forecasted load or load forecast and the base unit available at any given point in time, correct?
Ese punto específico es en el periodo que se está viendo el punto más donde hay mayor diferencia entre la demanda pronosticada y la generación de unidades base.
And baseload. Essentially, it's a difference between forecast and baseload.
Exactamente.
Exactly.
I jumped the gun on the previous one. You can translate that, please.
That specific point is the point with the greatest difference between the demand and the load.
If we look at both graphs or both charts, essentially we see what we've been seeing up to now, which is that PREPA is able to provide demand with the existing units, meaning the peakers, limited use, and base units. I understand that you're dispatching peakers to somewhat provide for what base load normally would provide. But so far, at least, it is forecasted that load will be able to be met for the entire period under both scenarios. Is that a fair assessment on these graphs?
En ambos se presenta que en unos periodos estaríamos cumpliendo los criterios operacionales de tener generación para cubrir la demanda y tener generación suficiente para la reserva. En el caso de Aguirre, entrando en mayo, todavía hay periodos que no se cubren, o sea que hay una deficiencia en cubrir la reserva, y obviamente si nos movemos hacia agosto, pues esa deficiencia se extiende.
So in both cases, it represents that we would be would comply in operations for the parameters for demand and also for reserve. But in the case of Aguirre entering in May, there are still some periods that will not be covered, and there's also deficiency if it moves on into August.
So one of the biggest concerns is that we will not have enough reserve to cover any eventuality that happens in the system, or if another critical unit goes out of service. Is that correct?
Eso es correcto.
That is correct.
By looking at these graphs, it looks like the critical area, the critical place where there is the major deficiency between, even on the best case scenario, which is Aguirre online by mid-May, that biggest deficiency occurs between May and June, correct?
Eso es correcto. Estamos todavía, y voy a usar este término, arrastrando los problemas del terremoto.
That is correct, and I'm going to use the following term. We are still dragging, so to speak, the issues from the earthquake.
So is it fair to say that PREPA is requesting this additional temporary generation to cover for that deficiency on the required system reserves.
Podemos decir que estamos, sí, que estamos, una base para tomar esa determinación es la reserva que tenemos que cubrir para poder tener una generación disponible y trabajar los criterios básicos operacionales de nuestro sistema.
Okay.
Yes, we could say that, yes, that the basis is to have the reserve that can cover available generation and to work with the system within the parameters required.
Okay. Under the best timeline scenario, in which if the Bureau approves the additional temporary generation somewhere between mid-May and mid-June, when will be the earliest that this temporary generation will be available at the operational level?
Daniel Hernández por aquí, para récord. El tiempo estimado en una instalación de esta naturaleza, basado en experiencias previas, después del huracán María, yo podría estimar que en promedio, unos 50 días en promedio, debería tomar toda esa instalación, desde que el equipo salga del origen, de donde esté.
Daniel Hernandez on the record. As far as an estimated timeline for these installations, based on our previous experience after Hurricane Maria, I would say approximately 50 days as to how long it should take to do the whole installation, starting with the moment that the equipment leaves or goes out for installation.
So based on the timeline that I described regarding approval, if it is approved, based on the timeline that I was describing for approval, if it is approved, that will mean that probably the temporary generation will not be installed in an operational stage until probably mid to end July to mid-August. Will that be a fair statement on the timeline or projected timeline for these projects?
Daniel Hernández para récord. La fecha estimada para poner en servicio las alternativas que nos ofrezca el mercado va a depender ciertamente de cuán rápido las diferentes entities puedan aprobar este proceso. Una vez que eso suceda, de ahí en adelante vamos a tener un tiempo de instalación aproximadamente 50 días máximo. La urgencia que nosotros estamos presentando en el día de hoy hace necesario que se tome en consideración ese tiempo de instalación para poder tener esa generación disponible y evitar que tengamos que caer en alguna deficiencia de generación mayor que nos lleve a relevos de carga.
So Daniel Hernandez, for the record, that estimated time to put the alternatives offered by the market and service will certainly depend on how quickly all entities can approve the process. Once that happens, from there, we will have approximately 50 days at the maximum for the installation. Our urgency today in presenting this makes it necessary to include the installation time in order to help us to avoid falling into any major deficiencies regarding generation and to avoid having to overlap or stack.
I understand that. It's just that you still have the operational limitation of the 50 days installation. I understand it's a maximum amount of time, but those 50 days will put PREPA at the earliest, first, second week of July. And my question is, with the Aguirre and Costa Sur units coming online fairly shortly after that, there will be an overlap of those 800 megawatts of generation plus the whatever up to 500 that will be installed during this emergency portion to cover a portion of a period in which the required generation is not as critical as the months of May and June, per the graphs that PREPA has presented. Can you reconcile the two?
Sí, Daniel Hernández por aquí. Responsablemente, PREPA tiene que prepararse para los meses de mayor demanda. El considerar como una garantía que las unidades de Aguirre 2 y Costa Sur
Abraham García
van a estar disponibles para la fecha a la que usted hace referencia en agosto es algo que nosotros no podemos tomar como una generación que va a estar disponible en este momento. Dicho eso, como es algo previsible, no puedo esperar, PREPA no puede esperar hasta que llegue el término de mediados de julio para tomar una decisión de añadir generación. Esa decisión hay que tomarla ahora.
Yes, I would, and this is Danny Hernandez for the record, responsibly, PREPA needs to prepare for peak months. To consider as a guarantee that the units of Aguirre 2 and Costa Sur will be available for August, as is being mentioned in reference, in something that we cannot take for granted as generation that will be available at this time. As is predictable, PREPA cannot expect that or wait until mid-June in order to determine that there's a need for adding generation. Such a decision needs to be taken now.
I completely understand, Mr. Hernandez. So the thing is that PREPA provided the Energy Bureau with these two graphs, and I'm going to have to assume that these are the two likely scenarios under these circumstances. Now you're saying that there is another scenario in which none of the two units are available by the August/September timeframe. And I believe that without that portion, the information that PREPA provided the Bureau to make a determination is incomplete. My question is, has PREPA analyzed a similar scenario like this? We can call it scenario 3, in which neither Aguirre 2 nor Costa Sur 5 is online by the expected dates, and we can add even one more that says that Aguirre 2 will be available, but Costa Sur 5 will not. So those are different types of scenarios that can educate the decision that we have to make. I agree with you that we have to make a decision today, but based on the information that you are providing here, which I am assuming that is the best or the likely scenario, then probably that much generation might or might not be needed. Now, if you're saying that there are other scenarios in which the Energy Bureau can base its decision or should take into consideration as well, I believe that PREPA should provide it as soon as possible. Don't you agree?
Oh, tipo, hasta yo te entendí. Que él lleva rato tratando de preguntarle algo y él como que no está contestando bien la pregunta.
Si le sigo, Daniel Hernández por aquí, si sigo su planteamiento, comisionado Rivera, ¿necesita usted o el negociado que se añada una tercera contingencia en la gráfica, que es la que estamos expresando, donde se tome en consideración la probabilidad de que en agosto ni esté en línea la unidad 2 de Aguirre ni la unidad 5 de Costa Azul? ¿Eso es correcto?
Este es el intérprete. ¿Podrías repetir, por favor, su declaración? Disculpe.
Bien, le estoy preguntando, Daniel Hernández por aquí otra vez, le estoy preguntando al comisionado si lo que él nos está solicitando es añadir una contingencia adicional en la gráfica donde aparezca el escenario con las unidades 2 de Aguirre y Costa Azul 5 fuera de servicio. Si esa es la pregunta, si ese es su requisito o lo que nos está solicitando.
So this is Daniel Hernandez. We're asking the commissioner whether he is requesting for an additional graph as a contingency where the scenario appears with these 2 units not being included. Is that what is being requested?
More than a requirement, Mr. Hernandez, is this. Again, the Energy Bureau makes its determinations based on the information that it gathers on the questions that it has and the information that they request from PREPA. PREPA here presented us with 2 scenarios, and the only 2 contingencies in which Aguirre was going to be available mid-May and Aguirre will be available at the end of August. And both of these contingencies that is being presented here assume that Costa Azul 5 was going to be available. And based on that information is my line of questioning regarding the need for a temporary generation that is going to be installed later on than the critical periods of May and June that is being presented in this graph. Now, you're telling me that we should not take that into consideration because there is another contingency and we are not sure that Costa Azul 5 is going to be actually available by August as PREPA is expecting. So as a regulator, in order for us to make an educated decision, if PREPA believes that that is an actual scenario that could happen or have a high possibility to happen, or PREPA is concerned and is trying to have the Bureau approve this generation based on the fact that we might or might not have Costa Azul 5 and 5 at the end of mid-August, then that is information that PREPA is required to provide in order for the Energy Bureau to evaluate it. Because I agree with you, the time to make the decision is now. And in order for us to make the decision, we're going to make it with all the information that we have available. And from my perspective, and this is just me, Angel Rivera, not anybody else in the Bureau, based on the timeline for the installation and the information that PREPA is providing regarding Costa Azul 5, at this moment, we have to thoroughly analyze the need for the 500 megawatts. If PREPA has other scenarios in which they think will be a likely outcome, then PREPA is required and is obligated to provide that information. That is my point. And they should, if that is the case, PREPA should do it as soon as possible.
Gary Soto para récord. Deseo aclarar la información suministrada y referente a las gráficas que se enviaron y otra información que se solicitó, parte todavía estamos trabajando en ella. En cuanto a las gráficas, quiero aclarar que se suministró parte de la información. Sí, hay una información que hay que añadirle a esos pronósticos que no está incluida, que vamos a enmendar para presentar el panorama completo.
Gary Soto for the record. Yes, I would like to clear that up. As far as the info and graphs provided, yes, there is still more information that is being worked on, and part of that information does still need to be provided. So yes, we need to add to that forecast some material that is not included, and we will amend that and provide.
Thank you.
Thank you. This is Bob Fagan. I would just add anything that's provided, please provide the underlying data in Excel in addition to the graph.
This is Vanessa Caron. Does Mr. Fagan have any additional questions for PREPA?
No, I'm all set once the graphs are provided in Excel form.
Any additional questions from the commissioners?
Not from me. This is Commissioner Mateo.
Not from my part either, Commissioner Ramos.
Edison Avilés, the list chairman, no additional questions.
I do have no more questions.
All right. Well, then I'll be providing a summary of the requirements that have been made during the call. The Energy Bureau requested copy of the letters from FEMA on the eligibility of the project as Costa Sur, a copy of the agreement with the EPA regarding compliance of the units subject to MAP, copies of the exchanges or communications between PREPA and the EPA regarding the tolling agreement and any negotiations for compliance with MAP, and provide the data in Excel format behind the two charts that were being discussed now, the updated in April 28, 2020 on Scenario 1 and Scenario 2 related to the generation scenario schedule, and any additional information on forecasts and information not included for the Energy Bureau's consideration. Have I left anything out, Mr. Fagan or commissioners?
I think that captures all the things that we required.
I think to the list it should be added. I mentioned when I made a question, any exchanges between PREPA and EPA regarding waivers for the units that are non-compliant with the MAP, and I would add now any correspondence and information between PREPA and the insurance company and FEMA regarding eligibility for reimbursement or payment for the damages of Costa Sur. So we have a clear record of what has transpired between their conversations and what the policies cover or not cover and what FEMA covers and doesn't cover.
Oh, this is Mr. Fagan. One more item pertaining to waivers from EPA. To the extent that EPA waives any requirements associated with the peaking, any temporary generation that might be installed, that would be important. I don't think we addressed whether or not the peaking generation would be approved. Temporary peaking generation would be approved by EPA, or whether or not you required any waivers from the EPA associated with any temporary generation that might be approved.
Likewise, the same requirement for submitting information about correspondence and permitting for the generation regarding this emergency. It should cover also the Puerto Rico Environmental Quality Board to the extent that it may regulate the operation of the unit. That's all from my part.
All right. Well, thank you very much. So if there are no additional questions or comments, I'm going to go ahead and thank everyone for participating on today's call. And we're going to end today's call at 1:09 p.m. on April 30th, 2020. Thank you, everyone, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you.